Today's episode is brought to you by the premium content subscribers on the Golf Intervention Substack. And we would, of course, like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. You make it all worthwhile. If you would like to support the show or sign up for our free monthly newsletter, you can do that at thegolfintervention.substack.com or follow the link in the show notes.
And welcome back to the Golf Intervention Podcast. My name is Eric Layton. I'm sitting here with my co-host Rob Fales. We teach golf for a living, and today on the Golf Intervention Podcast, we're going to talk about the golf swing. Rob Fales, are you fired up to talk about the golf swing?
Fired up.
Fired up. We don't talk about the golf swing that much on here because we're a show that's about the process of development, right? Development and learning and skills. And it's a very process-driven show.
Yeah.
And if you go back to our last two full-length episodes, you'll kind of understand the framework of what we talk about when it comes to development. And I will tell you that I know firsthand it's helping people because I had someone stop me at the country club the other day, and they're like, "Are you Eric?" And I was like, "Yeah." Like, "How's it going?" And Robbie, you heard this story the other day, but I was like, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I'm so and so, and I just wanted to tell you that I've been listening to your show, and you and Rob Fales have really helped me out." He goes on and on and on about how he's playing better, and he's, his handicap's down, and he, did well in the club championship and all these things. And I was like, man, that guy's playing better. He's never met us. Never met us. So all the stuff that we are talking about, and he told me, practice habits, strategy on the golf course, understanding the uniqueness of who he is and how he plays, and how to, efficiently fit that into his life and time and swing and all these things has helped him. And so we have focused on all those other things, equipment and practice and mindset and all the stuff that really lays the foundation of the learning framework, as I understand it, as you understand it, as a lot of people who teach golf understand it. I think today what we want to get into is the actual swing, kind of, right?
In a way.
In a way.
This isn't the first time we've taken a swing at this, by the way.
There you go. I like the pun, taking a swing at the swing episode.
Oh, that was actually not intended at all.
You did it though. You pulled it off.
Yeah.
So we recorded the other day. We tried to do this. We tried to pick up on skill and the sort of the mechanical, if you want to call it that, effects of skill, and try to separate it out.
Biases you maybe.
And it just didn't work. It didn't work. And like halfway through, Robbie's like, "This is not working." And we had a little argument
because it's too complicated. Like it didn't.
This
is the whole point,
work
right?
It doesn't actually work like that. So,
yeah.
What we're not going to do on this show is criticize how anyone teaches the golf swing. Because one thing that I've learned a long time ago is that people that put themselves out there doing something to try to help people may have different styles, right? And, whether that be the pastor at your local church might be different than the pastor at the church that your grandma goes to, or, there's all kinds of examples, a teacher, right? Or a professor, right? That might be peculiar or not, or more orthodox. And like, if you're learning or you're growing, then that person's doing their job, right?
That's right.
And so what we don't do is criticize other folks. Like, I try to learn from other people, right? So as far as the golf swing goes, and I think the main listener here is likely going to be a golfer, would be my guess. Well, we're going to say, we're going to leave a lot of things unsaid. So if you want to think about what we believe, you won't hear certain things, and then you'll probably take a guess into how we.
Yeah, you can read between the lines, kind of thing. Right?
Yeah, you can read between the lines, but we don't criticize people because, hey, people can criticize us, right? Everybody sees things differently. If you get results with your students, that's what matters. Like,
yeah,
that's the deal. And so I think that when we talk about the golf swing, the listener is, who knows, level 1, level 2, level 3 player. It's maybe a young coach is tuning in. And what we want to really make a point about on this episode is that we believe you're tuning into the golf intervention because you want to listen to what we have to say about it, right? This is what we believe, right? And so you're my captive audience. What we believe is that the golf swing isn't one right answer, right? There isn't one model of the swing. Okay. Modeling is a little tricky in my opinion. I think that for many years when we taught golf or tried to play golf, we had to sort of see it through the lens of a model because we didn't have a lot of insight on sort of the ball and club interaction or,
That's
you
all we
know,
had. Right.
yeah, we didn't have anything else. Right. So we would sort of model it. Um, and golf has evolved. I think people that's played golf for a long time or studied would say, yeah, things have evolved and things have gotten better. And those teachers that maybe had taught a model, a lot of them maybe have moved away from that and evolved in their own instruction. So I think they're just evolving and data is changing everything. So as we talk about golf, though, one thing I kind of learned way long time ago teaching golf was that there wasn't one right answer. And so the overall philosophy, if people ask me, tell me about your swing philosophy, Eric, because people say swing philosophy,
It's a
right?
great one, right?
It's all they ever care about is the swing. So you and I have laid out sort of a framework of golf development, which is very different than a swing philosophy, right? So what's your swing philosophy, Eric? Well, my swing philosophy is this. Everybody's different, right? Everybody's different. And people have different past experiences. They have different body shapes. They have different capabilities or limitations out of their body. They learn different ways. They understand different ways. They play different sports. And so they all bring something to golf. And then likely their best way of playing golf is understanding how they can apply that to skill development to make them play better. Right.
Right.
That doesn't mean they'll never change their swing. This isn't a swing your swing thing. This is like, there are unique characteristics to each person.
Yeah.
What I don't believe is the opposite of that, which is, hey, here's a swing and you should do it, right? Whoever you are. And I think that's kind of when we can get in a little bit of trouble in golf because that will
It's
help
interesting,
some.
right? It's like
Yeah.
what a lot of people want, right? When they take golf lessons, they want their pro oftentimes just tell them, hey, just do this.
Just do
Right.
this. That's it. Just do this. And you can't just do that. That is not what we just do. So I would say that it's easy to look at and watch the PGA Tour. Rory won right yesterday. Rory's got this swing that you would watch and you go, wow, that looks like an orthodox golf swing. Like if you whatever that means, when you watch it, you go like, that looks like a great player with a great swing. Okay, great. I would say that if you were trying to learn golf from major social media trends, doesn't look like Rory's swing, and it certainly doesn't look like Scotty Scheffler's swing. It's almost like
That's right.
Scotty Scheffler is a gift from the golf gods to make fun of all the like influencer golf swings,
Correct.
because like he's doing the complete opposite, right? Like
Yeah.
it doesn't look like super high hands, tons of lateral motion. Like, okay, it's not exactly what we're influencing on TikTok or something
Yeah.
or Instagram. So the point being that if Scotty Scheffler is the greatest player of this generation, which I think he's making a case for, and Rory McIlroy is a greatest player of this generation, and you have some other guys who are really, really good, like a Ricky Fowler or a Shane Lowry or these, and you watch their swings and you go like, they all look different. They all do different swings. And so I think that it's easy to see there isn't a right answer for should your left wrist or, your lead wrist be cupped or bowed or flat at the top? Should you have your arms over your right shoulder? Should your left arm be straight? Should you, who knows? Should you separate your femurs when you, transition, whatever it is, whatever these things are. Okay.
Yeah.
The answer is it depends. Isn't that true? I mean,
Yeah.
So I think that what we try to do as coaches is just try to learn the player, learn their history, learn their body shape, right? Like if you go back to our last episode with Dr. Mike Kay and listen to what he says about the shape of a person's body and how that may influence how they move, there's all kinds of things that play in. And so when we talk about the swing, it's a little hard for someone like Robbie and I to go like, yeah, here's the swing. You should do this. Because really, hopefully, if you come and watch us teach, you'd say, wow, like you taught 8 lessons today, Eric, but they all did kind of different things, probably. And that's fair to say when they come to see you, Rob. We're a lot of good teachers, right? We're not quartering the market on this. So I think that some of those important factors, like I'm just going to name some bullet points and we'll try to go through some of this today. A, generally people are just different. They see things differently. They learn differently. They may be able to move, differently based on their body shape or maybe some past injury history, or they're stiff in certain areas or weak in certain areas or hypermobile. Like all these things come into play, right? Then you've got sort of how they understand where the club is in space. So I think this is kind of a modern understanding of teaching, which does come into play. Something we call club kinetics, like this relationship between how we're moving and pulling the club and how it's kind of moving through space. And I think Sasho taught us a lot about that, right? If you go back to our episode and our interview with Sasho, and I said that I think Sasho put out one of the most important kind of videos in the history of golf instruction with Chris Como, because it introduced a lot of us to this understanding. Then you've got sort of this other stuff that we're seeing in the modern swing, which has a lot to do with how we're developing energy in the swing, right? We use the term energy, speed. You put speed in there. But really this development of energy, again, listen to Dr. Mike K. and that I've listened to that interview. I've listened to that episode at least 3 or 4 times. Because I just like the way he explains it. And he's got that brain. It's kind of like, when he's talking, it's
going too fast.
It's going fast. And I wish we had the video for it because he moves.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's like he's moving all over I don't know if he was in a chair that had wheels on it, but it was like it felt like he was moving all around his room when he was talking.
Yeah. And then at one point he did bring out the pelvis, and that was actually showing us, and that's hard thing about a podcast is that you don't get the visual. So I feel like watching it back over was a lot clearer and easier to understand than maybe listening. But I think still, I totally agree with you. Like listening back to it, it's always so much fun listening to him talk about movement.
And I thought you did a great job, which I texted you and said, a lot of what he was describing was super cool, but you had obviously
had some experience with him.
Yeah. You thought about it and had a relationship. So you had these like little illustrations. You're like, well, it's kind of like this. And I thought those were great, and those parts of the interview were awesome. And so there were so many things to take out of there. Yeah, it was a broad episode that covered a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But if you go back and kind of break it down, there was really, really interesting pieces to it. And in the modern instructional game right now, people are fascinated with energy. Like it's just, it's the thing. It's ground force reaction. It's, speed trading.
I would say so. And right, if we go back to, we've talked about this before, the 3 main, if you're going to come up with like a deterministic model of what is a golf swing, it really boils down to energy, time, and geometry, right? Being the main 3. I would say that energy is up and coming really recently, honestly, but it's nowhere close to geometry in terms of what people are obsessed with. Like if you look at Instagram, if you look at YouTube, if you look at all the stuff, everybody is still obsessed with geometry, like the positions the club is moving through and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no question. Because I think it goes back to, and I didn't actually say this, I meant to, is that for a lot of time, our digestion of the swing form was 2-dimensional, right? So it's just like pictures or videos. Mm-hmm. And so we're trying to glean information from positions of the swing. And then that sort of phases into the Instagram, YouTube kind of, and I don't know anything about TikTok because I don't have it, but that visual, like everything on Instagram is the visual, like the picture, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And it's kind of funny to me, like you watch these swings that kind of pop up and they're all in slow motion. And like you put any swing in slow motion, it probably looks kind of cool. Like
can't stand slow-mo.
So you have to be careful about what you interpret from 2D pictures or video. I remember one time when I got Rob Fales blocked by Brandon Chambly on Twitter because he would show these pictures from like complete random camera angles.
The camera angles were so bad.
He was trying to make all these points. And I'm not poo-pooing Brandon by any means, but he was trying to make these points about the golf swing. from old black and white
Mhm.
pictures from weird camera angles. And I just tagged Robbie and I was like, camera angles, question mark. And boom, Robbie gets blocked. I don't know why Robbie got blocked. He didn't block me.
I don't think I actually ever said anything.
I don't think you did either. Or you just like maybe made an emoji face,
Yeah,
like
I liked it or
rolly
something.
eye
I don't know.
comment or something. But,
It's funny.
but the fact of the matter is, the golf swing and the energy and all that, it's hard to determine from, what we had in the past, like
Right.
pictures. And so now what we have is new interpretations, what I think are getting interpreted incorrectly as well at times. Like, I'm not afraid to say that. And I would think that other people aren't afraid to say that. Like, you can't take 100 tour players and put a couple sensors on them and then
Mm.
say, okay, let's average all that data together and tell people this is what they should do.
Yeah, it's so dangerous, right?
Yeah, I think that's just because it was an interpretation of data, right? So the fact is that's the opposite of what we started with at the beginning when we said people bring their own unique things to the table and then we got to teach them how to have golf skills, right? But that modeling, that heart, like that big time, like here's the one model we're gonna, that's tough. I think that again, it probably helps some people, and some other people are going to really struggle with that,
Right.
because everybody does have their own stuff. And by the way, not a lot of people move like tour players. Like, so if you're taking tour player data and trying to teach a beginner 72-year-old, whoever, man or woman, but like that data isn't super helpful, I don't think.
Correct.
Right? It's not the thing to be focusing on. And when they go to practice on their own, what are they practicing? Like, what are they working on? They're not getting the data from whatever the 3D sensors were giving them in the lesson, right? So they got to be able to carry that out with them, and they can't. So,
And that's where, as an instructor, our job can be so dangerous if we have the belief that the swing creates the shot, right? Because we're going to give this guarantee. We're not going. You and I aren't going to, but a lot of folks who are maybe early in their teaching career or just who have misguided, are going to look at this data, because I know I did in the past for sure. So no hard feelings, but you look at the data and you say, okay, well, on average, which is incredibly dangerous, first of all, because you could have an average of data where no one is exhibiting that exact data point, right? And you say, okay, well, because they're doing this, just do this, right? But that data doesn't tell you how it's created, right? It just tells you the result, what ended up happening. So then you tell the story like, okay, well, if tour pros do this, it must improve the quality of your shots, whatever that means. Again, it's more of a judgment of like good or bad, right?
mm-hmm.
And so a golfer is going to go out and they're going to try to do X movement. And then their feedback is their judgment of, oh, that was a good shot. That was a bad shot. Right. And so this is how we get into these really, really bad rabbit holes and kind of spiral, go down this downward spiral.
Yeah.
Is oftentimes that's kind of the sequence that happens, unfortunately.
I think the most frustrated I ever see golfers is when they are trying to, quote unquote, hit positions in their golf swing in practice.
Yes.
And they're really struggling with that. I think it's really hard for most golfers to just feel what they're doing while they're doing it.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Let's just be honest. Right. And so like, just to say, oh, I was told I needed to do this at the top of my swing, or this halfway back, or this in my transition.
Right.
And we all work on parts of the swing. I'm not saying we don't, but when you're just trying to work on that, and the only feedback is, at the top of my backswing, I'm supposed to do this thing.
And that means
it's
good
really
shot.
hard. Yeah, it's really hard, right? Unless
Right.
you're filming every swing and giving yourself feedback. That's why we try to, in the framework, build you a feedback loop that has to do with impact skills, right? We teach you where the ball's hitting on the face, trying to make some judgment about the low point, make some judgment about the face path relationship as the ball's flying through the air, right? So these are the things that you can give yourself feedback on as you're practicing. Whereas if you say, I'm supposed to start my left hip forward slightly earlier than I was doing before. Okay. that's going to be tricky. I'm not saying we don't teach stuff like that, but it's going to be trickier, right? So you just have to be careful what it is that you're trying to take on. So you should never take any of that stuff on without a really good reason to do it.
Yes.
Right. And without like, if you go take a lesson from a coach and they say, hey, here's exactly what you need to do because here's your skills and here's your goals and you're not going to get there. And if you believe them and you understand it, then you should go work on that.
Yep.
But if you're like, hey, I want to get better at golf and I saw this video that said, if I hit it, I do this thing, I hit it further. It's going to be tough. Or I read this book or article. It's going to be really tough because the context matters. The context of the whole, to your point, the context of that whole thing matters. So as we go back into this a little bit, Rob, kind of backtracking. So when it comes to the swing itself, and I know Mike K talked about this, but let's just talk about the human being for a minute, right?
Yeah.
The human being comes in and they're trying to figure out what the golf swing is for them. What are some considerations? Obviously, you can summarize a little bit from Mike K's interview, but other things that you like to look at as far as just the person, they come, they're standing in front of you and you're thinking about what golf swing should look like for them. Are you making some judgments upon that before you see him swing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like Dr. K has talked about in the last episode, whether or not your skeleton, your frame is biased toward a wide or a narrow is absolutely going to give you constraints, right? I think understanding that it is a constraint doesn't mean it's determining that this is what you should or are going to do, but it's just appreciating the fact that this is something that is going to influence what you do, right? So wide rib cage versus narrow rib cage. If you just look at the human, right, you can look at someone with maybe a narrower jaw versus a wider jaw, right? So those two humans, while they're both humans, you can think of them as different animals, right? Mm-hmm. You've got a giraffe, right? Real long, it's very narrow. And then you've got an elephant, right? It has nothing to do with your body mass or your weight or anything like that. Like you have elite athletes who are wides or narrows, right? So it has nothing to do with that. Just your DNA, your physical structure would be number one. And then the other thing that I look at a lot is just a golfer's gait. Like when they walk, are they actually moving through early, middle, late propulsion in their feet? Is there some sort of like a cross crawl pattern happening between the step and the rib cage glide, that in the rib cage change of shape that we've talked about in the last episode? And then are their arms actually swinging freely, right? So what does that kind of sound like? It's your golf swing, right? There's a step, your rib cage change of shape, your arms swing, right? So that all happens in a golf swing. So if I see somebody who's maybe their left side is really pulled down, they're kind of, they can stride well with one foot or the other, right? Or maybe one arm's just not swinging, right? Then that's kind of giving me clues like, oh, we might have some stuff, might have some constraints. I mean, it doesn't mean that, because I've seen some people who I don't think they're going to move well. Like if I watch them walk, I watch them stand, I watch them and I was like, oh, this might be interesting. And then as soon as they get a golf club in their hand and they have the task in front of them, they move like amazing in front of me. And I'm like, man, that was surprising. So again, it's not deterministic. It's just, again, it's a constraint. So that would be number two. And then obviously we've talked about this a lot. Again, other constraints are going to be just your beliefs, right? Your conventions, what you believe you should, quote unquote, do. Oftentimes over a long enough period of time, you end up doing pretty much what you think you should do or trying to do. Problem is it's not always helpful, right? So those are kind of some of the main things that I look at on a day-to-day basis for sure.
I look at shoulders a lot, how their posture is at the top of their back and their shoulders, they have forward shoulder, or they kind of that rounded kyphotic look.
Yep. That all goes into like the gait. So like when I'm watching their gait, I'm watching their whole, it's absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. So that's a big one. And I don't see tons of walking, right? Cause they're just kind of popping into the bay with me most of the time. So that's one, but I would say that, trying to understand what people's limitations are. So if you take a lesson and I say, hey, tell me if you got any, do you have any hips, knees, shoulders, ankles.
People don't remember.
Well, they just lie most of the time.
Or that, right?
I don't think they're lying. I take it back. What they're doing is they're downplaying, because this is what we do in our mind. Like, we'll say, like that knees bob, it's not a big deal. So we just we compartmentalize it. And yeah, maybe day-to-day life, like it's not a big deal, but in golf, it could be.
I think half the time they do it because they're like, oh, well, if I tell them this, it's going to affect the way they look at me or like they view my swing or something. Like they want the most like unbiased opinion possible, but it only just helps us. Like that's the thing. Like it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And then to my point earlier, like I've had situations where like 3 or 4 lessons in, we're doing some stuff, right? And then they start feeling like their left ankle starting to burn or whatever. And they're like, oh, like what's going on with your left foot? And then they think about it like, oh, wait, I actually did have like a grade 3 sprain a couple months ago. I was like, oh, that would have been good to know.
Right. Oh, my ankle's fused. Oh, I had one a couple weeks ago. The lady, I said, tell me about your shoulder, because I could just kind of see it. Something was going on there.
Yeah.
And she goes, no, I don't have any problems. And she takes 2 swings and she goes, well, I do have a torn rotator cuff. I was like, well, that's kind of a thing, right shoulder, torn rotator cuff, kind of a thing for golf. Right. So these are the things that, and what I would say is, if your belief system was you were supposed to swing like Rory McIlroy and you have a torn rotator cuff in your right shoulder, that's going to be difficult. But if you don't have that belief and you say, hey, I've got this limitation, maybe not a torn rotator cuff, but maybe I'm just a little bit limited in my rotation, I can still play really good golf. I could play my best golf with what I'm bringing to the table. 100%. And that's what we're trying to tell you, right? The other thing that I think is interesting is I don't think that there is some notion that based on who you are, there's a right answer to exactly how you swing anatomically. And I do think some of those inferences are fine. I think they're good and they're insightful. But again, if you're influencing the belief system too much of the person and it kind of contradicts with something that they think they should do, that could be a problem. So I had a friend of mine who's a very good teacher, and he was learning a system. He went, got certified in this system of like biomechanical, measure me and tell me all these things, right?
Yep.
Tell me how I'm supposed to swing. Now he's a fabulous player, played at the University of Florida. Okay. Like good golfer. I said, well, I was interested. Like, how did it go? What did you learn? Oh, it was really interesting. But like when they told me how I'm supposed to swing, it hurt. And I don't, and obviously he's like, I don't, it's a swing change. So I gotta kind of work through it. So, dot. What I'm saying is his instinct was, it's not helping me and it hurts a little bit. It definitely hurts a lot, actually. So there can be some inferences there. I'm not saying there aren't, but again, I think it's you got to be careful when you say you should, or you have to do this thing.
That is a very dangerous word.
Yeah. We like could or options. Like you have options. Eric, should I take the club here in my takeaway or here? Well,
you could.
Yeah. I mean, you could. Let's talk about how that might affect the ball flight.
Yeah.
That's always what I'm going back to.
Right.
Like, well, if you take it back here, do you think that'll open or close the club face? Do you think that'll make the path move more into out or out to in? Like, there is some cause and effect there. How do you think it's going to help? And then, or change, right? Or influence. And then we hit some shots and see, right? See what happens, see how it feels. Does that feel right to you? Does that not feel right to you? So when we're talking about the body itself, the body shape, and then those limitations, you could call them the limitations that people have, it's going to really lend to what their options are in a lot of ways, but it's not going to say, here's your box, you're going to go fit in it.
Correct.
At least I don't believe it's that way. And so what I'm always doing when I teach the golf swing, just like any other part, is just what I said. We ask questions. Like I ask them questions, they ask me questions. We explore things a little bit, right? And then we come back and try to find, like, does that feel right? Could you do that? Does it not? Because I'm always trying to judge how far off of what feels like kind of like normal to them it is, because I don't want to try to move them too far off that. Right. Because I've learned that when you move people too far away from that all at once, it's very difficult to make the change.
For the skills to line up, right?
Yeah,
And
it's very difficult. Yeah.
when we do skill training, whether we do it intentionally or not, you can call playing golf skill training. When you use a general movement pattern and you skill train long enough, it's going to get coupled with that general movement pattern, right? So this is the cost of swing changes, is that if it becomes too different, then you're going to have to reestablish your awareness and your perception and your coordination of those skills that you spent all that time doing with your previous general movement pattern with what you're now doing, right? Which you can do. It's not a huge deal, but it just takes time, right?
No
And
question.
so if you got somebody, who's getting ready to go play a tournament, that's why we've always said, like, yeah, swing probably needs to be pretty darn low on the list if you got somebody getting ready to go out and play a tournament in
And
the
this is
next
why I
month
think
or
that
two.
people are so willy-nilly about changing their swing.
I know. It's
Like
it's unbelievable.
it's crazy to me. And
Good players too.
I think it's just because we're inundated with swing stuff all the time.
Like the
I think
only
that's-
option they're aware of.
Yeah,
right?
people are just inundated with swing stuff all the time. If you talk about process, no one's interested. You lose them in like 20 seconds, right? Unless the very intelligent listeners of the Golf Intervention podcast are interested in that. But I was listening to another podcast completely unrelated, and the guy was saying that it was an interview, and he was saying, yeah, I've got a health and wellness podcast. And he said, like, what you really want to tell people is it starts with mindset. It starts with,
Yes.
the process. It starts with all these things that, you can build up, but people don't want to hear it. They want to say,
No.
they want 3 quick tips to losing 10 pounds in a week. And like,
Just
you
do
know,
this.
and that's how this golf swing stuff is. And I think it's because you're so inundated. Like everybody will say, like, once you click on one swing tip on your Instagram, it's just your feed is inundated with all these things. And these people that are trying to make and I'm not trying to be critical, but a lot of the time it's just young instructors that are trying to make a name for themselves somehow. Right. And it's like popping up in my feed, and it's, you must do these 3 things on your backswing. I saw this one the other day. These are the 3 must-haves in your backswing. I'm like, 30-second video. What are you talking about? Like, it's just kind of irresponsible sometimes to do stuff like that.
For sure.
And I think that it affects people's belief system so much, but they see it and golf tip after golf tip after golf tip, swing tip after swing tip after swing tip. And so they're just like, oh, I should try this, or I should try that, or I should try this, and I should try that. It's
right.
crazy.
They're just grasping at straws, right?
Yeah, you're grasping at straws. It's kind of like trading crypto versus like just buying a stock and sitting on it for 20 years or something like that.
Right.
Like everyone wants the quick turnaround, where it's like, no, there's a process. And if you trust the process, things are going to work out for you in the long run. Like in the long term, things are going to be fine. In the short term, it's a little trickier, right? But you got to be patient with the process. And so that's why we focus on process, not as much on swing. Because I think what we said very early on in this show is like, if you wanted to change your swing, if it came down to that, which it does a lot of times, you got to get a coach. I mean, you almost have to get a coach.
Yep.
And a coach that you trust, and a coach that can really help you. As we talk about the swing itself, this understanding of club kinetics, which we are not going to have a deep talk about that today. Like I said, I think trying to go back and
Could be
check
a
out.
Substack.
It could be, you know what? Maybe it will be that's okay. The next bonus episode on the Substack will be on club kinetics. So give the listener, Rob, your like 30-second summation of what that means to you. What will we cover on that Substack episode?
Yeah, it's just your options of applying force to the club, right? And where that force is directed and in what direction relative to the club center mass, right? You also have like the amount of force, right? The rate of force. There's a lot of that can go into it. But again, it's just your options, right? So how do you get a club moving and rotating and swinging in space, right? So what are you going to have to do? How are you going to have to push and pull that thing, right?
Yeah, force and torque. Like this is what it's how your body is connected to the club and how the club's reacting to that, right? And what we're doing to influence it, what options we have. And again, this is kind of modern look at teaching golf, right? As opposed to like, you can go all the way back to the feel-based kind of instruction from the back in the day, which was really good. And got people playing golf. And then golf kind of evolved into a little bit of like a golf guru instruction time. I mean, I think the players had their moment, right? Ben Hogan kind of started like the players had their moment and they were teaching. And then you had all the gurus in the 80s and 90s that were like, come to the Mecca. I mean, and this is true story. Like David Ledbetter is one of those. Butch Harmon's were like, I know 2 tour players, one LPGA, one PGA Tour, both, retired. But they both have similar stories of like going to see David led tour players on the range at one time.
Amazing.
Just coming because there was a belief that there was an answer. And I guess there probably was, right? If he got results like he was getting with certain players with this swing stuff that he was teaching, then yeah, go see him, This is before TrackMan with the ball and club data. So what you had was like these teachers that were just considered, they were the ones, right?
The
so everybody was,
right?
yeah, they had the answers and everyone was going to travel to see them. And I'm not being critical of that. I mean, they did awesome, right? They were helping people. So that's just what it was at the time. It was based on 2D and it was based on this stuff. And then that kind of moved into like the early computer modeling of the swing, probably, right? Like, with the Morad stuff and the golfing machine kind of influenced a lot of teachers for a long time. It was like this like mechanical understanding. Stack and tilt came out of that moment, right? Like all these swings that were kind of named at that point, right? And now I think we're just to this point where we're kind of, not that stuff's irrelevant. It's not. People are still learning from that, but it's like, the evolution is in this other stuff, I think. And so then you have what you and I believe, which is that it's all starts with learning and process. And then you're trying to incorporate this stuff in as need be, and I think that if the description I have from 3 different tour players in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s of 40 people on the range with a swing guru, one person's filming them, taking the video. The person's not even watching them hit most of the time. They're walking to a little like cave kind of thing with a videotape, VHS tape, sitting with the golf instructor and then drawing lines on the screen, like with like marker, right? Cause they didn't have, right. And so that was, but that was the tools they had. Right. But this wasn't obviously a whole developmental structure. It was all about the swing. So they were going to see that person for swing advice, period.
Totally.
Right? And so that's just the way it was. And so I think now what you have is a little bit of a different deal, right? And there's all this technology and there's all this insight and I think that we're a little bit, we're just trying to take it all in and understand it, How is AI going to affect it? How is, new ideas of swing modeling going to affect it? I've been very hesitant to use 3D modeling systems just because I just don't, the ranges of outcome that they spit out for the player in front of me, I'm just not sure how relevant it is and how they can practice it and how it has to fit in the framework is what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah.
And I haven't seen it fit in the framework. What about you? Does it fit in the framework for you or how are you seeing it?
I use it as like a convention buster, right? So like if I have like I use a system that's called Motion to Coach, and they're actually coming to sponsor the retreat, which we're really excited about. But I use Motion to Coach a lot, as well as Smart to Move, and just show that they might have the belief that they need to stay still, right, or that their pressure doesn't move. And I'll show them one of my best ball strikers on Smart to Move, and I'll show them the center pressure going back and forth and kind of a nice flow, right, and then that will bust that convention, right? And also things about like the direction the handle moves at different times, right? So people think, oh, I've got to pull the handle straight to the ball in the downswing. Well, no, like look at some of the best golfers that I have. It does not move in a straight line towards the ball, right? And so I think from that standpoint, it can be extremely helpful. To that end, though, would my coaching be that much different if I didn't have it? No. I mean, I'd say it's not super relevant for 99% of the golfers that I see on a day-to-day basis. But again, that doesn't mean like that technology is so valuable for us to learn what to teach in some ways, but then also what not to teach. Like,
Yeah.
at some point, like I could have had the belief that the handle moves in a straight line towards the ball, right? But because we have measurement devices that actually look and see what these players are doing, we learn, oh wait, hold on, no, they're not doing that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's why I'm so grateful for things like Motion to Coach and Smart to Move, is that they really inform me on like what not to teach or what not to inundate someone with.
Right. I think that's totally right. And it's just like, for me, it's all about the feedback. So when we kind of go back into kind of the bullet points we're talking about, that ability to take a swing and adapt it functionally to the skill that you're
Yes.
trying to create has to come from a place of, I don't know, something that you have a good understanding of what you're doing.
Right.
You can give you feedback. Right.
And that's where like Smart to Move and Motion to Coach have been really helpful, is because a lot of my time is spent getting golfers to disassociate the feedback of their swing in their feedback of the skill and their feedback of the shot. Right. So a lot of times golfers go straight from swing to shot, like direct line, no awareness of skill whatsoever. So if we can start to understand that middle ground as we work through swing options to change biases, maybe get someone pain-free, to maybe increase or take away some of the constraints. Like let's say the way they're swinging just doesn't allow them to swing at a speed that they need to play, right? Well, if we're working on swing stuff to try to reduce those constraints, A, I want to see the result. Like, is it actually moving that bias? But then two, I want them to be able to give me feedback absent of the impact spot on the face, absent of the ball flight, right? Absent of the ball speed. Hey, did you do that or not? And so now if I can take Motion to Coach, I can show them like, yep, it was definitely different. You did something different. Now the shot wasn't what you wanted. You hit it off the heel, but it doesn't matter. Like you still did the swing that we wanted. We can go and skill train within the context of that same swing to get off the middle of the face. No problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a, as long as they can get feedback, that's the key. And that's the whole key.
100%. Yeah.
And so if it's hard to learn and develop without closing that loop down. And I think that's where golfers get stuck. So the golf swing, we talk about the golf swing. If you were coming into this episode trying to figure out how many planes you needed and, what your wrist angle should be, what you hopefully can take away from this episode is that there's options, right? And if you look at the swings of great players, you can see they do things differently. I don't love the term biomechanical matchup, although I do understand it. I do understand what they're getting at. But what I would say about that is sort of cause and effect, biomechanical matchup.
Oh, yeah.
It kind of, again, horseshoes people a little bit, I think. Where it's like, okay, you're doing this one thing in your backswing, so you have to do this in your downswing because that matches up or whatever. And I think again, it's a way to communicate with people, which is fine. At the end of the day,
quote unquote makes sense, right?
It makes sense. It makes
doesn't mean it's right.
But at the end of the day, I think that when you listen to some of that jargon, it's like there's so much information given to the student saying, do this and do this and do this, then do this and do then do. And it's like all this stuff over and over and over again. And I think it can work. But what I'm saying is, I think that if the student is really learning and understanding, a lot of that stuff's coming from them. They're asking questions, they're understanding, their understanding is pushing them towards gaining a skill. And then when it comes from inside of the student, when it's organic in that way, guided by a coach who's asking them questions or giving them feedback, they ask questions and then they go, oh, I understand what that means to me. I understand what it means to me, right? Yeah. I'm connecting the dots for myself. Then when they take it out of there, it's theirs. They have ownership in it. They have the ownership in it. It is not your concept of the swing. You might have guided them towards it, but their understanding is what matters, right? And this is where I feel like coaching becomes such an important thing. And this is what I try to reiterate with all my young instructors is like, you're going to have to, at some point, see it through a little bit of a lens of a whatever, because you're just learning. You're learning the cause and effect. You're learning these things. Like, how does this make this skill, or what am I trying to do? But it's all about communication. And when that student can come out of there and go, I really learned something today. It makes sense to me, right? And it might be different than the next person that comes in. That coach is helping that person on to gain a higher level of understanding that really helps them in the long-term develop, right? And this is why I never once put like side-by-side swings, like here's Mrs. Smith and here's Nellie Corda, right?
Right.
Hey, look, Mrs. Smith, halfway back, hey, let's start with this. Your posture is not like Nellie's. Well, Nellie's 6 feet tall. Mrs. Smith's 5'5", but I digress, right? Oh, the top of the swing, you look at this, look where your club is, look where Nellie's club is, right? We need to make your club look like Nellie's club. Well, if I'm teaching form on 2D like that, again, what is that? How is that woman looking at that picture, interpreting that? I don't know. Actually, I don't know. So for me, if I'm ever showing anybody video of a swing, I might say, hey, let's watch Rory, not compared to you, but let's just watch it. Or let's just watch Shane Lowry. Like he hits this certain type of ball flight. Let's watch what he's doing. See if you can figure out why he might be able to pull that off. Right. Mm-hmm. And then they ask me questions and they say things. We have a conversation. And again, learning happens. I mean, you've watched me teach for many years, right? So I think that those moments are so impactful for the student. Yep. And, it's okay for the coach to say, hey, this is all about you, student. It's all about you. It's not about me, right? So I think when we're talking about golf swing, as you can tell from what Robbie and I are saying here, it's not a willy-nilly, lighthearted, hey, I'm going to change my swing tomorrow kind of thing. Like, man, I think if we could just get golfers a little bit away from that and working more on their skills, and then when they feel like they've run into a wall with their skills, hey, guess what? There's a gap in my skill set. Let me go find a good coach and see if they can help me. Do I need a swing change to accomplish that? And a lot of times the answer is yes, they do need a little bit of a tweak here or there.
Right. And not all swing changes arise as intentional swing changes. So like a lot of times it's a concept thing. It's like, okay, what is your belief around how clubhead speed is created? Right. Like that's a big one. Right. And if you can find a coach that can start to strip away some of those constraints for you, you never know. Like your swing, if you take that constraint away, you never know how your swing is going to develop over time. But it's not, you never actually put your attention on changing your swing, right? Like that's one of the big things that we want to get across is like how far down the line that can be, and oftentimes should be. I don't like using the word should, but that's my belief. Especially for highly established players, even like low to mid handicaps, like they're playing every single weekend. Like they're going out there playing with their buds. Like their runway to actually change something is objectively really small, unless they're at the Country Club of Virginia and they have an amazing indoor facility they can use throughout the winter and actually, use it for that way. But a lot of times, like, especially in Virginia, we put the clubs down throughout the winter and then we're playing. We pick it up in the spring and we're playing right away. So it's like, it's not going to happen for a lot of players. Like they're not going to be able to actually change the macro aspect of how they're swinging a golf club. Good news, you can dramatically change a golfer's ball flight. You can get them swinging faster and get the ball going faster off the face. You can make a massive change to how they enjoy and play the game and you can make a massive change in their swing without putting their attention on it, getting them down these rabbit holes of, I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to do this to be successful. Because what we've learned from Dr. Pryor is that the more constriction that we give you, the less space that you have, right? And then what tends to happen, we don't play freely. We don't have access to those skills that we've developed, right? And then our psychology and our movements start to move in the undesired direction. So just keep that in mind. Like putting a golfer's attention on changing their motion does not come without cost. It does not come without risk.
Right.
And you better know what skill you're trying to bias. All right. To understand, hey, we're just biasing it. You're just moving the standard, like the center of dispersion a little bit.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're going to hit this next shot great. Right. There's no guarantees here. I think the more that we can separate the skill from the swing, from the shot, I think we can get golfers really on a much more a steadier, longer term path of improvement.
Yeah, totally agree. And to your point, like when you go after a skill change, sometimes the swing changes. It just changes
as a result of developing
correct.
that skill.
So
right,
here's
exactly.
a perfect example. I'm not picking on this, but if you're just judging, like you put some 3D sensors on them and there's big time scooper, right? Like pelvis doesn't move laterally in transition. They weights, pressures on their back foot at impact, right? They're flipping their wrists. I'm trying to use like basic terminology for the listener, right? So all of a sudden you say to them like, well, and I know you do that. Like, how does the ball get off the ground? Right. Just asking them the question, how's the ball? Well, a lot of times they don't realize it, maybe even consciously, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, that they're literally trying to fit the bottom of the club under the ball.
Yes.
And lift it up. Right. You see this a lot of times in adult beginners. Correct. And then you just describe to them, hey, let's check this out. I'm going to show you how the ball goes up in the air. You just describe low point to them. You describe loft, like impact on the face. And you give them the club back. Let me see a couple practice swings. Let me see if you can hit the ground after where the ball would be. Right. And the next thing you know, what's happening? They're shifting their weight.
Exactly.
Right. The low point is moved forward. They're not on their back foot. So the swing changed because of the skill change. Right. Right. And it was not about changing the swing to change the skill. It was changing the concept of what they were doing to get their skill. Exactly. And then their swing athletically adapted. So I think a lot of times we're just doing it a little bit backwards, right? We're doing it a little bit backwards. And then, we're making it a lot harder on the student or on ourselves potentially than it needs to be. Right.
Right.
And so what did that student gain from that discussion? A, they gained an idea of what the skills are. B, they gained this actual natural athletic motion without even thinking about it. Right. So they're doing it without trying to do it. So as again, going back to Dr. Pryor, they're being, they're not doing.
Yes.
Right? So they're just
love it. Yeah.
Right.
100%.
It is what it is. So again, we're referencing a couple episodes today. Dr. Pryor, Dr. Mike K.
It's like every episode now. We tell people.
Dr. Sasha McKenzie. Go check them out. I'm going to link them in the show notes. Why not? Not that you can't find them anyway, but why not make it easier on the listener? The point is, we've learned a lot from those guys over time. They're influencing people like Dr. Mike K. Dr. Mike K maybe isn't as well known as those other guys, but there's other people in that space that are influencing, right? They're influencing in a similar way. And so I think that the point that Robbie and I were trying to make to the listener, which I think we've pulled off, I'm excited about it. Hopefully we've pulled this off, listener, is the golf swing. It's really based on you, the person, right? It's really based on you, the person. And it shouldn't be taken lightly when you change your swing. You should have a process for that. And you should work through what we've talked about before, this framework of skill development. Go back to just our last few, you could listen to Mike K, but those two other episodes, full length episodes we did, where we talked about the skills and the framework building up to this. And we did that episode, when to make swing changes, which I've gotten tons of feedback on that episode. And here we are, we're at swing changes. And we tried to do this episode as like, okay, if the low point's this, you might have these options. And it was ridiculous. Because we don't teach like that anyway, necessarily.
Right.
Like we understand it, we don't communicate it that way all the time.
No.
So we knew it was crap, so we got rid of it. Here we are. I think hopefully we did better this time. So I think that in summation, hopefully you've learned a little bit of something. Anything else you want to add to the story tonight, Rob Fails?
No, I would just leave the listener with, there are a couple things, right? There are a few things that the research has shown us that most, if not all, elite ball strikers, touring professionals do pretty similarly, right? Um, it's only a couple. It's like
Yeah.
two or three things.
Mhm.
I think this is either going to be a Substack or maybe the next episode, but it's not what you think. It's
Mhm.
not like the position of the arms at the top. It's not the club face position. It's not the position halfway down. It's not the the
The
uh
pivot style
right.
necessary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of stuff that you can't really see that well,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
why, again, I'm of the opinion, and I'm showing this on video, that this number of golfers, I'm making a zero, this number of golfers uh, need to video their swing, look at their swing. I just don't,
Bold statement.
I
Bold
don't,
statement.
because here's the deal. The only
Yeah.
thing they're going to
Yeah.
look at is geometry anyway.
Yeah.
Like, and there's nothing geometrically that all the best players or ball strikers do commonly. So, like, what are we doing?
And
Basically, like,
I want to add this in. I know we made this point a couple episodes ago, but it fits in here right in this moment too. If your notion of the golf swing is that there's perfect positions that you're going to perfectly repeat time and time again to hit your ball right in the middle of the club face or the square club face or whatever ball flight you're going to hit, and you're just going to repeat, and you're going to train that through repetition and then never change it, and it's never going to change. You're just setting yourself up for a tough time in golf, right?
Yep.
And you have to have adaptability, and you have to understand function, and you have to understand who you are as a person and how you move and how you learn and how you can judge your skills and change your skills and adapt. And I thought that Mike Kay said something that I just have to wrap my mind around a little bit more, which is he was talking about tuning the club in the swing.
yes.
And I just got to wrap my mind around that one a little bit more because I know what he's talking about. I
Oh,
think
for sure.
it's almost an unmentionable thing in a
It's
way.
a state of being, I think. I think
Yeah.
you're just present with the club.
It's
I don't think
almost
you're trying to
unmentionable
force anything. Yeah.
because it's like, it's almost like golf swing nirvana. It's like the culmination of like,
But he mentioned it, and like you and I have both experienced it. Like,
We-
yep,
yeah,
I felt
yeah.
like I had all the time in the world there. I knew exactly where the club was the whole time. Right.
right. But and again, I think the more constraints we have,
Mhm.
the less likely we're ever going to get to a place like that.
Totally agree. The more you
and-
think you're like, you have to do X, Y, Z, I think the less likely you experience that.
And so that's why, and again, I don't want to leave this episode with anybody thinking we were being critical of any instructor, because we are
Right.
not. I think people do the best that they can. People communicate differently. People learn differently. People had different tools at different times in the world and in life, and they've all done great. I would never criticize anybody. I mean, I mentioned names today. David Ledbetter. David Ledbetter's one of the greatest instructors of all time.
Legend.
Yeah, he's a legend. So I'm not being critical. I'm just telling you what it was like to go see him in the 90s from the stuff that I had heard. So the point is, and I don't know that I would teach the golf swing just like David Ledbetter does. And I think that's okay too. The point is, you have options. And so if you believe you don't have options, like I have to do this, that's why I said I don't love the matchup thing. I understand what people are communicating there. Like, oh, if you do this, then you have to do this thing to match it up. Well, I mean, yeah, I get
there's
it.
no
But
such thing as there's no such thing as cause and effect anyway.
well, that'll be part of our other episode. We don't have enough time to talk about it. Rob Hales just drops
That's
us in. There's no such thing as cause.
That's a very, very poor misunderstanding of how this all works, is cause and effect. That's like one of my least favorite things ever.
So it just, you have this swing. And again, we're going to do a Substack on the club kinetics, and we might add something else into that as well. We'll see how deep that goes. But that'll be our next bonus episode, which we will record in the next few days. And I kind of feel like that whole Mike Kay tune in the club thing was just so cool. And that's just like the culmination of what we were just talking about. It's like,
It's like your access
can you
to
get
skills.
to this place where
Yeah.
you're so at one with what you're doing that you can literally just adapt your skills at a moment in time and just be,
Yeah.
with the ball flight. And I know that sounds a little zen, and I am not a zen guy at all. But the point is, it's a state that we've been in. If you've played really good golf, you've been there.
100%.
You know who's not there right now is Victor Hovland. It's tough to listen to Victor talk right now.
Mhm.
Victor is, if you've heard some of his interviews recently, he's really, really in the like in the woods. It sounds like lost in the woods in the wilderness, kind of like wandering around with his golf swing. But to your point, when he talked about the changes he was making to see certain things, now he can't figure out where he was. That's what he keeps saying. He said, I was here and I was doing great. And then I wanted this one extra little thing. And now I can't figure out all the other stuff that I was doing well.
Not to get on too long of a tangent, but like, I think he needs to accept that you can't step in the same river twice. You can't go back in time. You can't be who you were.
The river issue. We sound really zen today. We sound like Buddha or something today. But the point is, that river has changed, right? And so he's trying to find that, and he's got a good instructor that I think he's working with now, friend of the pod, we'll call him. But hopefully they find a place. Hopefully, I mean, he said he had no idea. He said his golf swing was trash, I think, and the next day he shot 65 at Pebble Beach. But that's the talent level of Victor Hovland. Like he's unbelievable.
His skills lined up on that 65.
His skills lined up, and hopefully his swing starts to get himself to where he can find some level of comfort to where he was. So I like that. You can't step in the same river twice. Think about that, people. You cannot step in the same river twice. That's why we talk about adaptability. Things are changing day to day. Tiger Woods talked about this. No one listened to him. Everybody thought Tiger was crazy. And he talked about it constantly, right? And why is Tiger changing? Why is Tiger hit 9 shots? He should only hit 1 shot all the time. Like, no. Like, Tiger knew what he was doing. He was the greatest of all time for many reasons. So anyway, I don't think I have anything else to add to the golf swing.
No, I think we did it.
I think we covered the things we wanted to cover. Again, we were not critical of anybody. We would never do that. We're just trying to say, if you want to tune into our show, here's what we're going to talk about. And that's it. Because if you're listening for our opinion, we gave it. And hopefully it was helpful to you. So takeaways from today, just listen to those other episodes. Be, don't do, work on your skills. If you have to work on your swing, take a lesson, and don't take it lightheartedly because golf swing changes are tough. So thank you for tuning in again to another episode of the Golf Intervention Podcast. We're humbled and honored that you listen to our show. To be quite honest, we're just a couple of guys that can't believe. We just keep growing and growing. It's pretty cool to see. We appreciate you tuning in. So
100%.
Anyhow, I hope you all have a great evening. Good luck with whatever it is that you're doing in golf. I hope it's warm where you are. It was 65 today in Richmond. And I'm looking forward to the spring sooner rather than later. All right, Rob Fales. Have a good night.
Good night. Cheers.